Welcome to Open House Limerick 2020. This year's theme is Limerick Through a Lens. Obviously, during the lockdown due to COVID-19, many of the events and openings that are usually held through Open House, the architectural festival in Limerick, they're usually taken for members of the public. But this year, true to this situation, we're doing a series of video presentations around Limerick City and County. So for this video and tour, I'll be giving a brief intro to the Canal Harbour behind me. We're just located here on the confluence of the Park Canal and the Abbey River, where it was chosen in the mid-18th century to link up Limerick City with the Limerick navigation and the Grand Canal that linked Limerick and Dublin in the 18th and 19th century. This video for the Open House Limerick is based in and around the Park Canal and the Canal Harbour that you see behind me. We're choosing this site because I'm currently working for Limerick City and County Council on an EU Interreg funded project called MMIAH, which stands for Military, Maritime, Industrial Atlantic Heritage, which is a research and restoration project in the Atlantic area. So Limerick is a partner along with Cork, with English partners in Plymouth and Liverpool, French partners in Caen and La Rochelle, and two Spanish partners in Cadiz and Ferrol. The MMIAH project it's a research project to try to cultivate the cultural and societal memory of abandoned, neglected and lost military, maritime and industrial sites along the Atlantic coast. In Limerick, we did a research project called an evolutionary study. So we took the tranche of all military, maritime and industrial sites relating to the Shannon River and the Shannon Estuary, stretching from the Kerry border in the west, all along the Shannon Estuary as far as Limerick, and then up as far as Montpellier at the Tipperary border. In the evolutionary study, we decided to have the scope of the evolution study to have all sites from the date of 1690 up to the end of the emergency in 1945. This period was chosen so that we could record the physical and cultural memory of many sites that are unrecorded because of the age of many of these sites. They wouldn't be on the record of protected structures or on the sites of monuments record. In the evolutionary study, we recorded about 250 sites in Limerick City and County relating to the river, and of these, about 20% are still standing, 30-40% are site of or have ruins, and the remaining are lost sites, but there's still a record in maps or in historical records. In the evolutionary study, we finalised the choice of one particular building that would be of most benefit to tourism and culture in Limerick City and County. And of all of the sites in the evolutionary study, we decided to choose the Canal Harbour office on Lough Key as the prime site that we could restore and rehabilitate for future use as a public amenity. Join us here at the Canal Harbour at Lough Key with the canal gates behind me and the Uzold Bridge and the canal manager's house behind me. From the evolutionary study, Limerick City and County Council chose the Canal Harbour offices here for restoration, and for that we did an extensive conservation and management plan and a building survey of the extant buildings. And as well as the building survey and the restoration, it was important through the MMIAH project in valorising and capitalising on the lost military, maritime and industrial heritage of the site to do extensive research into the history of the Canal Harbour and the canal system in Limerick as a whole. An important factor of the conservation and management plan was to understand why the canal was chosen for this site. We know that from historical records in the 17th century that this area was called the Bog of Clune. It was corporation land, and it was rented out to a Christopher White, who was an alderman and butcher in the area. Other deeds and records we know indicate that this area, which is in the townland of Monamouth, was the original pig town of Limerick. Monamouth, the townland here, is Mwyn Nimwicka, which means the bed of the pigs, or Laba Nimwicka, also the bed of the pigs. So there were numerous abattoirs outside East Watergate, just behind me in Irishtown. And we know from successive deeds that this area was chosen because there's, behind me, Grove Island, behind the Canal Harbour offices, there was a river called Pool of Vadra that drained the bog of Clune and the other bogs that ran along what later became the canal. In cutting the canal, they were able to join up the Abbey River with the course of the old River Shannon up in Rabogue. The canal itself was started in 1757 and it reached the Park Lock 2 years later and cut through where the Guinness Bridge and the old River Shannon a year later in around 1760, 1761. The Park Canal is part of a much wider canal system in Ireland. So the Park Canal cuts through from the Abbey River up to the old River Shannon. That bypasses the Corrigower Falls, the Lax Weir and the weirs along Corbly, which boats couldn't travel over, especially at low tide and during the summer. The Park Canal, then the towboats would then go across by a ferry and later where the Black Bridge is in Plassey, and then that would join up with the Erina Blackwater Canal, and that would join up by O'Brien's Bridge. The Erina Blackwater Canal bypasses the cataracts and waterfalls at Dunas and Castleconnell, again allowing boats and barges to travel up from Limerick up to Lough Derg, and from Lough Derg the barges and flyboats would be able to travel up the Shannon and join up with the Grand Canal, linking Limerick with Dublin. Through import and exports, this would link up Limerick with Dublin and also with trading ports, especially Bristol and Liverpool in England. Okay, with the construction of the Canal Harbour here started in 1757, and later the bridge here was constructed in around 1760, 1761. The bridge, lovely limestone and brick humpback bridge, was likely designed by Edvard Uzold, a Dutch engineer and designer, who also helped build the Loch Mills, a large milling complex which is located behind me at the appropriately named Loch Mills Apartments. The Uzold Bridge is actually Limerick's oldest surviving bridge. Obviously there were many older medieval bridges such as Balls Bridge and Thomond Bridge, but both of them were demolished and rebuilt in the mid-19th century designed by the Payne brothers. The bridge here links the south side of the canal with the north side of the canal and enabled the traffic of goods into Limerick and out of Limerick up the canal as well. On the bridge itself there are many original features such as the cobblestones and the jostle stones at either end that are used to prevent carriages from hitting either side of the bridge. And as part of the conservation management plan for the Canal Harbour offices, the conservation management plan also did an inventory of all of the small features of industrial heritage that remain in and around the canal, such as the crane on the south side, the original wrought iron grates and railings, the original bollards and the jostle stones and cobbles that you see behind me here. You're joining us here now on the south side of the canal in an area that is still known locally as the Cooperage, named also because of the long-standing tradition that Arthur Guinness and Co. Brought most of their Guinness down on the canal to Limerick up to 1960, and the local barrels or coopers were based in the area. Behind me here is what remains of the Grand Canal stores, and just behind me here on the left there would have been an awning coming over covering the south side of the Canal Harbour and covering half of the canal side so that goods could be put onto boats and off boats and kept dry. Behind me on my right, again you can see one of the original features of the canal is the derrick and crane of one of the canal infrastructure. There's another small remnant of another crane around 300 metres down to the east behind me. Typologically, these cranes are identical to many of the others that were operated by the Grand Canal Company along the canal system in Ireland. With the construction of the Ardnacrusha power station and the head race and tail race canals in the late 1920s, the vast majority of barge traffic on the canals to Limerick ceased. After 1929, the only major users of the canal to Limerick was actually Guinness and Co. They used the tail race and head race canal still, and they brought the Guinness barges down by the Abbey River, and they only used the Canal Harbour to get the Guinness off the barges. The actual canal itself, the Park Canal and the Erna and Blackwater Canal, was closed from that. Up to 1960, when the canal finally closed in Limerick, it was often said by men who frequented pubs in Limerick that the Guinness in Limerick tasted much better than any other Guinness in Ireland, because the stout was allowed to settle in the casks on the barge, and the slow journey from St James's Gate down to Limerick from Dublin allowed the Guinness to settle, and that the porter in Limerick tasted better and creamier than any other pint in Ireland. The canal again closed totally in 1960, and this area became quite derelict, and it wasn't until the late 1980s and the early 90s that restoration programs were put into place to open up the canal for recreation use. The Limerick Civic Trust in the mid-90s restored the Uzold Bridge and much of the Canal Harbour, and recently the Water in Historic City Centres project with Limerick City Council, and then following the Limerick Smarter Travel project, has opened up the canal as a recreational amenity, joining Limerick City Centre with the riverine suburbs and the walkways on the Shannon banks, and the canal towpath linking Limerick City and the campus of the University of Limerick. Again, you can see things like the exercise machines, the seating areas, and it's a lovely amenity that is used for walkers, dog walkers, cyclists, and kids going to school. The Park Canal is approximately 1.6 kilometres in length, and almost exactly halfway along the canal there's a lock called Madden's Lock or Troy's Lock with the Park Bridge going over. When they were cutting the canal from 1757, from the Canal Harbour up to this point, it was predominantly mud from the Bog of Clune and Bartlett's Bog, but once they came to this point, they found out that they were coming up against limestone from the area. People that were digging out the canal had problems with flooding when they were coming through the bog up to this point, and after which they had to pick through the limestone by hand. The location of the Park Bridge almost predates the canal, as this site leads from Rabogue and the Old Park Road coming over with Hines Bohreen, linking up to the Old Park Road and Paddy's Hedge and Corbally on the north side. On the south side of the canal, just at the junction with the Old Park Road, is what's known as the Canal House or the Canal Hotel. And this is run for many years by the Harold family, who owned land in this area from at least the 17th century up towards the mid-18th century. The Canal Hotel was a famous stopping point for people that were visiting Limerick, but it was too late for them to come into the city itself, so they stayed here overnight. In 1828, the honest Tom Steele, a friend and associate of Daniel O'Connell, actually founded the Independent Club in the Canal House in Limerick. The Independent Club was founded as a means to have local politicians and people of note and workers to form associations against the rules that were put in by the British government at the time, that was stopping people meeting and having political discourse at the time of faction fighting in the mid-19th century. Okay, just here on the north side of Madden's Lock, behind me is what's known now as Corbally and the Abbey Rovers. This area again was an ancient roadway that predates the cutting of the canal. The Old Park Road leads up to Corbally on this side. Behind me here on the boundary wall of the Abbey Rovers Football Club, there was a halfpenny well, obviously named because it cost a halfpenny to drain water from the well. Again, Penny Well, the area on the south side of the canal, is again named after another public well that cost a penny to use. The boundary gate and wall of the Abbey Rovers is actually the same property boundary as an old roadway that was known as Paddy's Hedge in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. Just to the north of the Halfpenny Well, there was a famous pub and meeting place. This meeting place outside the boundaries of the city was a known frequenting place of many agrarian secret societies such as the Ribbonmen and the White Boys in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Although the ancient roadway along Paddy's Hedge is no longer extant, it is still fondly remembered by many local people, as it was actually a popular courting spot in the early and mid 20th century. It is even known that one of the parish priests in St. John's Parish used to hide in the hedge awaiting courting couples on a Sunday morning and castigating them from not going to church and sending them back into town. One of the main benefits of the Park Canal in its use today as a public amenity is that it links Limerick city centre with the riverine suburbs of Ribogue, Corbally and Shannon Banks. The Park Canal, as with most of the Shannon River, is an SAC, a special area of conservation. And behind me you have a wetland that is on the north side of the canal that is cut off by the Pahealy Road and the Pahealy Bridge. This wetland is actually a remnant of the Pool of Adra River that predated the cutting of the canal. And in fact, that Pool of Adra is probably a derivation of, in Irish, pool or hole of Anvadra Ishka. So it's probably named after otters that were known in the area. This wetland is currently unnamed, and I would hypothesize and suggest that a good name for this wetland is the Pool of Adra. Okay, on the north side of the Canal Harbour is where the vast majority of the larger industrial sites were located. Behind me here is the remnants of the Loch Mills Arch. This archway was dedicated to John Norris Russell, who took over the Loch Mills in 1844. The Loch Mills themselves were built by Edward Uzzold, the same Dutch engineer who built and designed the Uzzold Bridge just at the Canal Harbour. Andrew Welch and Edward Uzzold built the Loch Mills in 1764. It was a 6-storied structure, and at the time it was one of the largest and most sophisticated mills and granary structures in Ireland. It was powered by water from the canal itself and also water from the Abbey River. Grove Island itself was created and made into an island in the late 18th century, so the isthmus or peninsula from the Pool of Adra was cut to create a headrace channel to power the grist and corn mills of the Loch Mills. The Loch Mills have a long and storied history, and notably the Bard of Thomond, Michael Hogan, worked there in the 19th century, and in the late 18th century and the early 19th century there were 2 food riots at the Loch Mills when the poor of Limerick raided and took over the mills and stole all the flour within. In the riots at the Loch Mills in the late 18th century, the Mayor of Limerick, Andrew Carr, actually brought in the military and fired on the food rioters and protesters, killing at least 3 people, including a young girl who was hit blindsided by a bullet at the start of Broad Street, about 150 metres away. The Loch Mills continued into use until about the late 19th century and then fell into disuse and were demolished in about the early 1920s. Just further east of the Loch Mills doesn't exist anymore, but it's the site of the St. Mary's Rugby Club. It was actually the site of the Canal Brewery, which was built in 1815 at the cost of £25,000, which is a huge sum at the time. The Canal Brewery was a massive site. It spanned over 14 bays on the east side and was 3 stories in height. Unfortunately for the Canal Brewery, it was built by a concern from County Cork to bring the brewery industry to Limerick. But unfortunately, as with most other breweries in Ireland, Arthur Guinness and Co. took over most of the stronghold of the brewing industry in Ireland, and the brewery in Limerick didn't last very long. The ruins of the Canal Brewery were still extant until the early 20th century and were unfortunately now removed. At the head of the Canal Harbour area are the Canal Harbour offices. They're known locally sometimes as the Lockkeeper's House, the Canal House, and sometimes as the Canal Hotel. The Canal Hotel assignation for this is probably a confusion between this canal house and the other canal house that was the Canal Hotel owned by the Harolds that we saw up by Madden's Lock. Going back through the records of the Limerick City Council and the Office of Board of Works, we're able to find out that in the 18th and 19th century this building was used as a store, and it was the manager's office for the Grand Canal Company. The building was built over a number of phases. The limestone building to the west is the earlier building, and the red brick building to the east was added on at a later point. The building itself is owned by Waterways Ireland, and Limerick City and County Council has required a lease with an agreement with Waterways Ireland to restore these buildings for public use as a public amenity, and with the support and funding from the MMIAH project, we hope to restore the building to make it development ready for potential tourism use. As part of the conservation and management plan, when we first gained access to the building, you couldn't see in front of yourselves, it was so overgrown. So one of the first things we did was to secure the site and put new gates in and to clear the vegetation from the inside of the building. It was only then that we were able to ascertain the development and scale and scope of the building and the amount of work that needed to be done. The development of the building is something that I spent quite a lot of time on. I actually made quite a few models of it to give an appreciation of the development of the building. So as we see, the limestone building, the grey building, is the earlier building and was shaped in the shape of an L, and there's the walls on the inside make it look like there was another range on the inside of the red brick building. The first building here was built in around 1760 to 1761, and we know that there was references for the Board of Works that there was a canal manager's office at the Canal Harbour. It is likely that part of the building was used for stores, as there's a sub-basement inside the building, and it would have been used probably as lockkeeper's house as well during that period. It was only once the vegetation was removed that a contractor was brought in to do a full building survey of the Canal Harbour buildings. With knowledge of the interior of the site, we were able to find out that there were chimney breasts in the original building on the west side, and then the interior halfway down the building at the junction between the older building and the new building. We know from historic photographs and from the architectural survey of the difference in the architectural features and doorways that the red brick building on the right hand side is actually, it's older, and it was original 2 stories in height. And the two buildings married each other in a very complicated manner at the rear of the building, with the chimney breasts joining up between the two. I went ahead and made these models as a means to try to get around my head to get the higgledy-piggledy walls and levels of the floors don't seem to match. So I found that actually making a physical model and also 3-dimensional models using AutoCAD and Google SketchUp was the only way I was able to find out and ascertain the full development of the site and to understand its development over time in its use as a storehouse, a lockkeeper's house, and as later as the manager's house for the Canal Harbour. With the closure of the canal system in Limerick in 1960, this building was no longer in use and quickly became derelict. We know from historical photographs dating to the 1950s that by that period, just before the closure of the canal, the red brick building on the east was lowered by a storey, and the roof was matched up with the chimney breast that linked the two buildings together. Through funding from the MMIAH project and other supporting funding from Limerick City and County Council, it's hoped to restore the building, to consolidate the structure itself, have a feasibility study to understand future use of the building, and we might have enough funding to actually recreate the building as you see here as it appeared in around 1955. So in the coming weeks, the consolidation and restoration works on the Canal Harbour buildings are due to begin. The works themselves will include, following on from the building survey, will be restoring all of the door surrounds and all the window surrounds to stabilise the building, to make sure it's going to last another 300 years, and to cap the roof line of the building by removing the excess vegetation. The interior of the building will also be cleared out, Due to the fact that there are 2 cellars and sub-basements within the building, we won't be able to fully restore the interior, but we'll be able to consolidate the building for future use and potential development as a tourism amenity in Limerick City Centre as part of the MMIAH project. Well, I hope you enjoyed this virtual tour of the Canal Harbour and the canal area in Limerick City for Open House Limerick 2020 and Limerick Through a Lens. This video and the other videos for Open House Limerick 2020 will be available on the Open House Limerick website and also through limerick.ie. Thanks very much.